In this video, we're going to review multiplying polynomials using the box and factoring polynomials, and specifically quadratics, using the star. So to begin, let's start with multiplication. So if we have x plus 3 times x minus 2, and we want to multiply it with a box, we're going to draw a box. We're going to label our box with x and 3 and x and negative 2, or you could switch the sides. It doesn't really matter as long as you have both sets of parentheses represented on the sides, and you've got, like if it's a plus 3, then you've got a positive 3. If it's a negative or a minus 2, you've got a negative 2. Alright, so then you split your box up, and you multiply inside your box. So you'd say x times x, which would give you x squared. You would do x times 3, because you always do outside times the top, which would give you 3x. You do negative 2 times x, so outside times the top again, which would be negative 2x. And then outside times the top for this box, negative 2 times 3, to give you negative 6. Once you get the box filled out, then you write everything down that's in the box. And then you combine your like terms. So you find things that have the same variable with the same exponent, and you put them together. So that means that 3x and negative 2x would be like terms. So we would say x squared, negative 3x minus 2x would give you plus x minus 6. In the next example, you've got 4 times x minus 5 times x plus 1. So for this one, you've got a number outside of a set of parentheses and then another set of parentheses. To begin, you're going to start by taking the 4 that's on the outside of the first set of parentheses and distributing it to everything in just the first set of parentheses. So just in the parentheses that that number is immediately touching. So whenever you do that, you would have 4 times x, which would give you 4x, and 4 times negative 5, which gives you negative 20. But you still have this x plus 1. This looks very similar to the first example that we did. So we would do this one in the same way we did the first one. So we would draw our box, and we would label our box. And then we would multiply inside the box. So 4x times x would give you 4x squared. X times negative 20 would give you negative 20x. 1 times 4x would give you 4x. And 1 times negative 20 would give you negative 20. So then you would write down everything that's in the box. And then you would combine your like terms. In this case, it would be negative 20x and positive 4x. And whenever you add those together, you'd get 4x squared minus 16x minus 20. Even though this one doesn't look the same as the other examples that we've done, this little 2 in the air is going to make it look pretty similar to the other examples. So if we've got something like x minus 6 to the second, that little power tells us that we are going to have the stuff that's in parentheses 2 times. So what we're going to do to begin is we're going to start by writing x minus 6 2 times. And then it looks pretty similar to the first example that we did today. So we would draw our box, we would label our box, and then we would multiply inside our box. So x times x gives you x squared, x times negative 6 gives you negative 6x, negative 6 times x gives you negative 6x, and negative 6 times negative 6 gives you positive 36, because a negative times a negative always gives you a positive. So once you get the box filled out, then you write everything down. And you combine your like terms. So negative 6x and negative 6x. And whenever you add negative 6x plus negative 6x, you would get negative 12x. So your answer would be x squared minus 12x plus 36. On the next one, you've got negative 2 times x plus 8 to the second power. So just like we did in the last one, we're going to begin by writing out this part that's squared 2 times. So what this means is, because this little 2 is on or right outside of the x plus 8, that means that the only thing that we're going to write twice is the x plus 8. So this little 2, or negative 2 that's over here, is not affected by this power because it's not being directly touched by that power. If we had something like this, where we had parentheses around the negative 2 times x plus 8, and then the squared, then we would have to worry about squaring the negative 2. But because our original problem just had the x plus 8 being squared, that's the only thing we have to worry about. So we're going to keep the negative 2 out front, but then we're going to write x plus 8 2 times. So now this is similar to this example. So we're going to begin by distributing the negative 2 to everything in the first set of parentheses. So negative 2 times x and negative 2 times 8. When you distribute the negative 2 times x, you get negative 2x. And when you distribute the negative 2 times 8, you get negative 16. So now, don't forget about your x plus 8 that's over here to the side. So now your new problem that you're really worried about is this negative 2x minus 16 times x plus 8. Now keep in mind that this and this mean exactly the same thing, even though they look quite a good bit different. So once we get to that point, then we draw our box and we label our box. And remember, we could switch that order around if we wanted to, as long as what's together in the parentheses is on the same side. So we do negative 2x times x, which gives us negative 2x squared, negative 2x times 8, which gives us negative 16x, negative 16 times x, which gives us negative 16x, and then negative 16 times 8. So we would do 6 times 8, which gives us 48. And then 8 times 1, which is 8, plus 4, which is 12. Because we've got one negative, one positive, our answer is going to be negative, so negative 128. So then we write everything down that's in the box. And then combine our like terms, which would be negative 16x and negative 16x. So our answer would be negative 2x squared. Negative 16x minus 16x would be negative 32x minus 128. Next, we're going to review the star method, which is a method of factoring that we use specifically just for polynomials that are quadratics. So if you'll recall, a quadratic is a polynomial that's written in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. So you'll know that a particular polynomial is a quadratic because it will have at least 2 terms, but one of them will definitely be an x squared term. So you will notice that you've got a, b, and c, which will be numbers kind of depending on what your polynomial looks like. And your a and b will be coefficients for your variables, and your c will be your constant. A will always be with x squared, b will always be with x, and c will always be by itself. So whenever you go to set it up, you're going to draw a big X with a line through the center of it. You'll label it AX, AX on the sides at the top, A times C in the middle at the top, and then at the bottom you'll have question mark, the sides at the bottom, and then B in the center. So once you get your star filled out, then you'll be looking for your question marks, which are your magic numbers. To get your magic numbers, you'll be looking for two numbers that will multiply together to give you A times C, but that will add together to give you B. Once you get your star completely filled in, then you will see if you can reduce the sides of the stars by treating them as if they're fractions. And if you can reduce, then you should. You'll end up with two sets of parentheses, and this will be your final answer. So your answer will always look like this. So to begin, for our first example, we've got x squared plus 5x plus 6. So you'll start by figuring out what your A, your B, and your C are. So remember that A is always in front of x squared, B is always in front of x, and C is always by itself. So in this case, our A would be the number in front of x squared. And remember, if there's not a number there, it's an imaginary 1. So you've got A equals 1, B is in front of x, so B is 5, and C is the constant, so C is 6. So then you'll set up your star and label it the same way every time. Then you'll go back and fill in based on what your A, B, and C were. So AX is going to be 1x and 1x. The top would be 1 times 6, which is 6. And the bottom would be your B, which is 5. So to get your magic numbers, you'll go over to the side and you'll say 6. And you'll write down all the things that multiply together to give you 6. So to get 6, you'd have 1 times 6, or you'd have 2 times 3. So remember that the top has to get your magic numbers, you're going to be multiplying to get the top, but then you're going to be adding to get the bottom. So we're going to go through each of our pairs and just add them. Add the two numbers. So 1 times 6 would turn into 1 plus 6, which would give you 7. 2 times 3 would turn into 2 plus 3, which gives you 5. So the one that works is 2 times 3. So we'll plug in a 2 and plug in a 3. Treat the sides as if they're fractions, so 1 over 2 and 1 over 3, and see if you can reduce. So we can't reduce 1 over 2. We can't reduce 1 over 3. So our answer is then going to be x plus 2, because it was a positive 2, times x plus 3, because it was a positive 3. At this point, you may be thinking that this looks a lot like the examples that we did a few minutes ago, and so that's a good way for you to check and make sure that you get what you start with. If you check by using the box and you don't get what you started with, then you did something wrong. So to check this one, I've already labeled my box. I'm going to do x times x, which is x squared, x times 3, which is 3x, 2 times x, which is 2x, and 2 times 3, which is 6. Write everything down. Add my like terms, and whenever I do that, I get x squared plus 5x plus 6. Because it matches what I started with, that means that I must have done my star right. On the next one, you've got x squared minus 9x plus 8. So to start, let's label our A, B, and C. So A would be 1, B would be negative 9, and C would be 8. So we start by drawing our star and labeling our star, and then filling in our A, B, and C. So 1x, 1x, 1 times 8, which is 8, and negative 9. So then over on the side, we're going to think about things that multiplied together to give us 8. So we would have 1 times 8, or we would have 2 times 4. But because we look and see that our B is negative, that means that whenever we add our two numbers together, we're going to have to get a negative. Now, if I think back to multiplication in general and multiplying integers, I can get a positive answer by either doing a positive times a positive, or a negative times a negative. If I was worried about trying to multiply to get a negative, I would be worried about trying to have one positive times a negative. So because I want a positive, but I need it to add to give a negative. That means I'm going to need two negative numbers. So then I have to go through and see which pair is going to add to give me negative 9. So negative 1 plus negative 8 would give me negative 9. So this is going to be my two answers, or two numbers that I plug in for my magic numbers. So then I do 1 over negative 1, 1 over negative 8. Can't reduce either one of those. So they become my two sets of parentheses. X minus 1 times x minus 8. I could always check it using the box if I wanted to be 100% sure about my answer. For the last one, we've got 2x squared plus 3x minus 9. So we label our A, our B, and our C. We draw our star, and we label our star. And then we fill in the numbers using our A, B, and C from up top. So 2x and 2x on the sides. In the middle, you'd have 2 times negative 9, which gives you negative 18. And at the bottom, you'd have positive 3. To get your magic numbers, you're worried about things that will multiply together to give you negative 9, or negative 18, and add to give you 3. So if you're thinking about negative 18, let's ignore the negative and just think about things that multiply together to give us 18. So we would have 1 times 18, we would have 2 times 9, we would have 3 times 6. But we need it to be a negative 18. And so if we think back to what we just talked about a second ago with negatives, the only way to get a negative is to do a positive times a negative. So we need them to have differing signs. What we're going to do is we're going to look at B, and B is going to give us a hint about our bigger number. So if B is a positive, that means that we want to have more positives than we do negatives, which means our bigger number in each of the pairs is going to be our positive, so that it matches B. If B had been a negative number, our bigger numbers would be negative. So since we have a B that is positive 3, we're going to go through and make all of our bigger numbers positive, which means all our smaller numbers would have to be negative. So the only one that will add to give us positive 3 would be negative 6, or negative 3 plus positive 6. So we'll do negative 3 and positive 6. So then we treat the sides as if they're fractions. So 2 over negative 3 will not reduce, so we keep it. But 2x over 6 will reduce, because we can divide 2 and 6 both by 2. So if we divide 2 by 2, we get 1x, and if we divide 6 by 2, we get 3. So because we can't reduce 1 over 3, we keep that, and our answer will turn into 2x minus 3 times x plus 3.